Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we are diving into something really special. It's a genuinely brilliant 10-day curriculum designed for 7th grade English language arts. The whole thing is built around an individual simulation called the Archive. And its main goal? Well, it's as fascinating as it is tricky. It's literally designed to catch middle schoolers squarely in their own cognitive biases.
Which begs a really interesting question, right? How exactly do you teach a 12-year-old that they're biased without, just handing them a dry textbook definition and crossing your fingers they memorize it? Well, the creators of this curriculum, Patience Learning, figured out an absolutely ingenious workaround. You just don't tell them they're biased. Instead, you design this elaborate scenario where the absolute, undeniable right answer is also the most excruciatingly boring one. And then you just sit back and let human nature do the rest.
Section 1. Welcome to the Archive, the library simulation.
So here's the setup. For 10 days, students play the role of critical readers for the Riverside Public Library. Their mission is to pick one of 3 historical collections for a massive public exhibit called Words That Built Riverside. You've got Collection A, The Chronicle. These are front-page newspaper stories full of really vivid, exciting narratives. Then there's Collection B, The Minutes. These are your dry, procedural community council notes. Just yawn, right? Finally, Collection C, The Spotlight, which is all polished magazine profiles. Now notice right off the bat how fundamentally different these 3 feel to actually sit down and read.
Moving on to Section 2. The boring choice wins. Let's look at the secret architecture.
Okay, let's pull back the curtain here, because behind the scenes, this whole simulation is rigged. The structurally correct answer, the one that undeniably wins on the evidence, is Collection B, the agonizingly boring council minutes. And this brilliantly sets up the central tension. A student's gut feeling is going to immediately pull them toward that thrilling, narrative-driven chronicle, right? It's human nature. We all love a good story. But the hard, objective evidence, that lives in the dry procedure.
Now, what's really interesting is when the students finally get the raw data matrix on day 8, you can objectively see how the boring choice completely dominates the measurable facts. I mean, it's not even close. The Minutes boast 847 documented decisions. The Chronicle, just 312 stories. The Minutes have 23 academic citations compared to the Chronicle's 8, and they feature voices from 14 different neighborhoods instead of just the downtown area. The data is absolutely unambiguous.
Section 3. Trapping cognitive biases. Experiencing flawed logic.
So how do they spring this trap? Well, the curriculum acts as an active psychological trap. It's this carefully choreographed 10-day cascade of tests and audits. And the whole point is to force students to experience their own flawed thinking in real time, way before anyone gives those mistakes a fancy academic label. It all kicks off on day 3 with a memory gap test. It's simple. Closed book, just write down what you remember. And just like you and I tend to remember a flashy news headline way more than some dense policy paper, the kids quickly realize something. They can easily recall dramatic quotes from the Chronicle's big fire story, but they draw a complete blank on those highly important but super dry budget records. Boom. The gap between what sticks in our heads and what actually matters is totally exposed.
Then on day 5, we get the highlight test. The students are handed a perfectly balanced packet of passages, and they just have to mark each one as strong or weak evidence. Sounds easy enough, right? But when they actually tally up their marks, an undeniable pattern emerges. They inevitably trick themselves. They end up marking way more strong evidence for the specific collection they're already kind of secretly rooting for. Next up, day 6. A massive constraint drops. They only have 20 total research hours to spend on the whole project. During this hour's audit, students are forced to confront a really uncomfortable truth. Are they refusing to switch to the data-heavy Minutes simply because they've already burned a huge chunk of their limited time reading that exciting Chronicle? It really makes them sweat. And then day 7 throws a massive wrench into the whole shebang. The library suddenly uncovers the Whitfield interview. It's this deeply emotional, historically vital profile that strongly pulls students over to Collection C, The Spotlight. But right after they read it, plot twist, a duplication check proves that the exact same testimony actually exists in multiple places. In fact, it's the boring Minutes that contains the true, unique, primary source transcript of the town vote. It's a brilliant way to force students to separate powerful writing from actual unique evidence.
Section 4. The power of commitment. Locking in choices.
So to really test their intellectual honesty, the simulation actually locks the students into their choices halfway through. They have to submit a sealed commitment. Pick a collection, give a 2-sentence reason, and rate your confidence from 1 to 10. But the real genius, the trapdoor, is step 4. They must explicitly name one thing they still do not know. It literally forces them to recognize their own blind spots right before their answer is digitally locked away in the vault.
There's this quote from the teacher's guide that I absolutely love. A revision you can articulate is a revision you can defend. A revision without a reason is just a swerve. Hit the nail on the head, right? The entire grading metric for this project revolves around this idea. It heavily rewards students for honestly articulating exactly why they changed their mind based on new evidence. What it absolutely does not do is reward them for just happening to pick the right answer early, or worse, pretending they were right all along.
Section 5. The Day 10 Reveal. Facing Past Choices.
All right, let's dive into the climax on day 10. The library finally shares its definitive analysis, proving once and for all that the Boring Minutes collection is the undeniable winner. And as the students unlock those sealed, day 0 predictions to face their past selves, that's when the actual academic terms drop. Only now, on the final day, do students map this formal terminology directly to the specific traps they just spent 10 days falling into.
Take hindsight bias, for example. You know, the tendency to feel an answer was obvious once you already know it. When a student tries to backpedal and claim, "Oh yeah, I totally knew the boring answer was right all along," the teacher simply points them right back to their own locked day 0 handwriting where they confidently picked the exciting newspaper. It completely and beautifully shatters the illusion. Then there's the availability heuristic, judging importance by ease of recall. Connecting this directly back to that day 3 memory test, the kids realize that just because a dramatic narrative is super easy to remember, that doesn't mean it's the actual factual record. And let's be honest, that's a trap we all fall into pretty much every time we scroll through sensational social media feeds, right? And the sunk cost fallacy? Well, that puts a formal name to that exact anxious tension they felt during the day 6 hours audit. They realized they almost sabotaged their entire project simply because they didn't want to abandon a collection they'd already poured a ton of hard work into.
And of course, we can't forget confirmation bias, the tendency to mark evidence more carefully when it supports what you already believe. When they look back at that day 5 highlight test, they can see in their own tallied marks how perfectly this defines their behavior. They prove to themselves that they weigh evidence differently when it supports what they already want to be true.
Which brings us to the ultimate irony of the final grading rubric. It explicitly prioritizes intellectual honesty over performance. Seriously, if a student writes this beautifully polished essay claiming they followed the data perfectly from day 1 and were never, ever tricked, they actually score lower. They score lower than a student who maybe sloppily but honestly details exactly when and how they were totally fooled.
As the students finally walk out the door, the educator reads a memorable close aloud. It's 3 questions to carry into the rest of their reading lives. Which sources earned my trust? What would change my mind? Whose voice is missing? Honestly, it's just a profound toolkit for navigating a really uncertain world.
So, knowing how easily our own brains favor a good story over cold data and how quickly we lock into our first impressions, what will it take to change your mind tomorrow? Take a moment to really reflect on your own biases when you're consuming information. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.